Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Rabbit and Fox Control. My name's Ian McFarland and I'm one of the Sheep Connect SA team and host for tonight's webinar. Tonight's webinar has been recorded and we'll share the link in coming days. We welcome you to revisit the content yourself and share it with your colleagues. So tonight's webinar is a result of Australian Wool Innovation and the SA Sheep Industry Fund that support Sheep Connect SA. And for more information on Sheep Connect SA, please visit the website or through Twitter. Today's presenter is Josh Rosser. Josh is the Rabbit Control Coordinator for PIRSA Biosecurity SA.
No worries. Thanks for that, Ian. Good evening, all. Like Ian said, I'm the PIRSA State Rabbit Control Coordinator, and spend a lot of my time running around the state talking about rabbits and fox control, and really it's trying to give everyone a few hints and tips on how to effectively manage their rabbits and tie that in with fox control as well. And so, basically the concept of tonight is really to give everyone a little bit of a 101 on rabbit and fox control, get some basics done. In a lot of our conversations with landholders, there's a few gaps missing, a few myths and misunderstandings about what best practice is, and really just trying to offer some efficiencies in why we need to really take this on board as part of our enterprise. So the simple thing is, why do we need to do something? Well, is because places like this still exist right across the state, in areas where there's been some controls done. A lot of people have sort of taken their foot off the pedal a little bit and really have relied on the introduction of viruses to do their rabbit control work for them. And no virus has ever really achieved the total knockdown that everyone is really aiming for. And so we need to take some more steps to improve on where we're at. So I'd like to start off the conversation with a few rabbit basics. We all know that rabbits breed like rabbits. We've all laughed and joked about it, but most of us don't really know how good they are at it. So rabbits are sexually mature from 3 to 4 months of age, and the females are pregnant only for sort of 28 to 30 days, producing on average litters of 4 to 7 young. So that means that a mature female rabbit can be continuously pregnant for between 6 to 8 months of the year under favourable conditions, which in turn turns out to a single pair of rabbits can produce 30 to 40 young per year. So within an hour of giving birth, the male rabbit is going towards the female again, and they're breeding again to stimulate ovulation. So there really is no relief, and it's just a revolving door. So under favourable conditions, so situations like we have now, we've got fairly high rabbit numbers through the Adelaide Hills, from sort of the southern end of the Barossa right down to the Fleurieu. Those favourable conditions, long green feed seasons, and milder summers really do allow those rabbits to continuously breed right through long portions of the year. Some other things to take on board are that rabbits can consume up to a third of their body weight. So for sheep producers, a simple equation is about 10 rabbits consume as much feed as 1 DSE. With the numbers that are around the place, by some simple rabbit control, that's fairly inexpensive. You could up your stocking rates fairly considerably with reducing your rabbit numbers. Now, this little chart here shows how rabbit numbers can rapidly increase. It's been a sort of a fairly common belief, I've only got a handful of rabbits, they're not doing a lot of damage. Well, if left to their own devices, 2 rabbits in 18 months have the ability to produce 180 plus rabbits. This has been studied and it's proven in a rabbit colony that was sort of wild living. They were being researched and counted, but it was a sort of a wildish population, and the numbers are pretty impressive when they stack up that fast. And really, it goes back to 2 really is just too many. So what are we going to do about it? Simple messaging is use all the tools available to us. Success is really depending on exposing as many rabbits as possible to as many control tools as possible. We have a number of things up our sleeve, and the conversation that we'll go through tonight will follow the bouncing ball, for want of a better word, the use of the biological controls, and then going through our more conventional controls, so our bait laying, fumigation, and follow-up tools as far as that goes. The first step that we really need to understand is to target the weaknesses in the pest species biology and behaviour. For rabbits, you must overcome their rapid reproduction. Their ability to outbreed us is paramount to our control methods, basically. So the concentration, where you need to concentrate, is not on how many you kill, but on how many you've left behind. If you leave a handful behind, they're going to rapidly outbreed you again and become a major issue for you very, very quickly. You need to really target that 95% population reduction to get the relief that you really need to be chasing. So the first step in our control programs are looking at biological controls. Now, biological controls have been around for a long time. Myxomatosis was the first one, released back in the 1950s. It was highly successful. No biological control has been as big a boon to the agricultural industry as what myxomatosis was. They believe 1 in 1,000 rabbits survived the initial outbreaks, but need to remember at that point in time we had hundreds of millions of rabbits, so that still did leave a breeding population. So now myxomatosis is still out and working. Now we have running around in the environment three strains of the RHDV or the calicivirus. The things we need to consider with these viruses is there is immunity issues that start to raise their head, and those viruses that we need to sort of start to reintroduce ideally would be in the 8 to 10 year cycle, but it's been a long time between drinks for some of these, and there's a particularly large gap for the original release of the RHDV field strain back in 1996, and then the onset of the RHDV V2 or the European strain in 2015. That RHDV2 occurred naturally. It occurred out of Canberra. It's a wild strain that bled through the country very, very quickly. It does take out kittens occasionally, and it does take out the odd hare. It's been known to jump across, which the other virus strains haven't done. Then we come along to the RHDV K5 or the Korean strain, which was released nationally in 2017. This virus was introduced to try and impact on some of the rabbit immunity issues that the other strains potentially had, and it was also targeted to try and hopefully do a little bit better in the cooler, more temperate climates, which the original RHDV strain did very well in the arid lands, but didn't quite do so well in some of the cooler climates. So the Korean strain was developed and was a potential threat to that area. So a few things that you need to consider with the calicivirus. It's a virus that only affects rabbits. Do get a lot of comments about, what happens if my dog eats a rabbit that's infected with calicivirus, or what if I, put it in the pot and end up cooking one up that's had an infection but hasn't died yet. It really is a species. It really is a virus that only affects rabbits. Some things that you need to look at in your virus spread. The viruses do spread very well. Typically, it's spread mainly by flies. You can see on the image there that there is a fly sitting on that rabbit. It's that rabbit there that you see is in a typical death pose of a rabbit that's been killed by calicivirus. Head's back, laying on its side, and it's a hemorrhagic disease. So the head tilted back is as gasping for the last sort of breaths that it's got possible as hemorrhaging its lungs. So like I said, the virus is then spread by flies. So the carcasses do get obviously fly blown, and there's enough virus in one fly spot to start a reinfection. So those flies will move in and around the warren system and in feeding areas, and readily help with the infection of further rabbits. It's also spread by contact in and around the warren system in feeding areas. The virus is also able to survive being consumed by a fox or other carrion feeders, and then pass through their body in their feces and urine. And if rabbits come into contact with those areas, again, that can start another reinfection. So the virus is quite fast. It kills within 2 to 5 days of infection, which is significantly shorter than myxomatosis, which is up to about 3 weeks. The disease course is very quick, so it's only going to last potentially a fortnight. Comes in, hits hard, takes out all the susceptible adults that are in the infestation zone, and then it's run its course. Now, you notice that I said susceptible adults. That is the key sort of word in what we're looking at with the RHDV virus. It is targeted to adult rabbits. So the average rate of control for the RHDV K5 is around about 40%. And part of that is trying to juggle this rabbit immunity. Now, the original field strain and the Korean strain only target adult rabbits. So those are rabbits that are around the 12 weeks plus weeks of age, and they've reached a critical weight of over 1 kilo. And once they have reached that, if they haven't been exposed to the virus beforehand, they are highly susceptible. In the younger rabbits, anything up to 4 weeks of age doesn't usually succumb to the virus at all. They have maternal antibodies that are passed on, and they all have this heightened resistance to it. So if they then are exposed to the virus, they then develop lifelong immunity. Now, as they're progressing from that 4 weeks up until that 10 to 12 week period where they've reached that critical weight of 1 kilo, that resistance gradually wears off. But if they are exposed to the virus in that period and they do survive it, again, they have that very high, long-lasting immunity to the virus strain. So they then become the next breeding population, which is a bit of an issue. So if you do go down the release of the biological control path, the K5 can be purchased through New South Wales DPI, and anyone can buy it off the shelf. It's open to the public. Best is released in spring, so you're trying to target as many adult rabbits as possible that have gone through the green feed stimulated breeding cycles through the winter months, and hopefully they're up and around about that 3 months of age and have reached that critical weight of 1 kilo. Then you can expose them to the virus and get some good localized knockdown. Bearing in mind that the virus is stopped by heat, so it's not anywhere near as potent through the heat of the summer months. So all virus activity does slow down through there. So again, that's why we're going for the spring, trying to get as many adult rabbits as possible that we can expose to the virus before the heat sets in. So with what I've just said, you can see that the virus isn't the fix-all that a lot of people put it down to be. So you do need to use these conventional control measures, so your baiting and so on, which is what I'm going to now sort of move into. Your main conventional control methods are baiting. You've got a couple of options. The first option is 1080 oat bait in South Australia. The reason why we use 1080 is it's a naturally occurring plant toxin in a lot of Australian species. So a lot of our native species actually do have a heightened resistance to 1080. So for example, a lot of people ask about birds, for example. An emu is going to jump on your bait trail and consume the 1080 oats. It's got to eat about 11 kilometres worth of bait trail before it's going to suffer any ill effects. So they're highly, highly resistant. A lot of our kangaroos and so on, again, they have heightened resistance towards the 1080. We use oat bait only in South Australia simply because the chemical sits on the husk of the oat. So if the parrots get into the grain, they husk the oat to get to the kernel on the inside, and they spit the husk out, which is effectively spitting the chemical out. So again, it's trying to minimize that off-target damage. When you're doing your actual baiting yourself, trail baiting has been developed. So if you look on the slides on the right-hand side there, there's 2 bait layers there. They're a hopper that you fill with your oats, and they have a little cutting disc on the front of the machine, and you can see quite clearly in that bottom slide, it's about a 2-inch furrow. And as you're driving along, the bait is dropped inside that furrow. The reason why that's done is the rabbits are attracted to the disturbed soil, so they come over and investigate. And upon investigation, obviously they find the bait. So it's a bit of a attractant, get them over there, and it stimulates them to come and investigate further, because you're going to use some free feeding to ensure high bait acceptance. So what that means is you're doing 3 free feeds prior to your poison feed. And what you're effectively doing is you're training them to associate that disturbed earth with feed. They come over, they get accustomed to taking it. Typically with your free feeding, I've always skipped a day. So you might feed on the Monday night, just prior to dusk, and then skip a day and then feed again on the Wednesday. Skip a day and then feed again the Friday night, and then you can lay your bait over the weekend. That just allows them to get used to coming onto the trail, and it allows you to check what sort of activity areas you've got over the sort of the 2 nights with the exposure to the feed, and that way you can really target where you want to lay hot spots of baited oats. By laying it in trails, you're allowing dominant animals to eat their fill, they get their patch, but also it's exposing other rabbits that aren't so dominant into areas so they can still consume the oats themselves. Really, really critical that you don't shortcut your free feeding. A lot of people that say that the baiting program they've done, it hasn't been successful. After having discussions with them, it typically is showing that they've either skipped or not done at all some free feeding, and it really is just short-circuiting their own program. They're doing themselves out of success. Summer and autumn are the best time to bait, simply because that is when the lowest feed availability is around. You've got some natural issues associated with that time of year, and that rabbits that are exposed to heat, the numbers have dropped off there, particularly younger kittens that are born in late spring aren't surviving through those months. So numbers are typically down, and also with low feed availability, they'll readily go onto the bait trails. So if you have a look at the bait trail itself on the left-hand side of the image there, a free feeding trail is approximately what you'd see on the right-hand side of that image next to the ruler. So you're looking at around about 4 kilos per kilometre of trail, and that's about what it looks like in a furrow. In the left-hand side of that image, you're looking at around about 2.8 kilos per kilometre for your poison feed. So it's a very, very fine trail, and it's really only looking at managing numbers. So they've got to eat less than around about half a metre, so less than a metre to get a lethal dose. So very simple to do, very cost efficient to do. So you're looking at around about $2, $2.30, $2.40, depending on where you're purchasing your 1080 oats from to run a program there. So it's quite cheap for running a bait trail. So to show you what a bait trail can look like, this is an image of a bait trail that was done on a property. There's a few little quirks on this property in that land management from neighbours was a bit of an issue, and also the terrain for getting bait layers in and around the property made life a little bit more difficult, a little bit more challenging. So the yellow dots are all rabbit warrens. The white lines are the boundaries of the property. With your properties, your neighbouring properties, when you're using any 1080, so that's with fox bait or rabbit bait, you do need to do neighbour notifications, and there are minimum distance restrictions. With the rabbit bait, it's 150 metres from a dwelling. So with properties where that becomes closer, you can get landholder permission from those neighbours. They have to give that permission to lay bait any closer with that, and that's done in conjunction with working with your local natural resource management officer, and they can talk you through that process, how to get those permissions and what's really required to get that. But as long as you're outside those distance restrictions, there is no issue with doing any program. No neighbour can say, no, I'm not allowing you to do that baiting program if you're baiting on your property outside those distance restrictions. Bait has been laid close to, but not on top of a warren. Rabbits always leave home to go and have a feed. They don't typically feed on the warren, so you're getting much better results slightly away from the warren. So towards the left of the image, you'll notice that there is 2 bait trails running through that cropped area. And those rabbits were moving in and around, coming from the neighbouring property and moving out towards the crop. So you're just moving through the baiting trail. You will notice in a couple of areas there, particularly towards the right-hand side, I've got 2 rings running around those warrens. And in many places as possible with your baiting programs, try and give at least 2 lines of feed, so that again, any animals that get bumped off the first feed line get access to the bait again. Where possible, going all the way around the warren system so that you can get access, or the rabbits can get access to bait at whatever direction they leave the warren.
In regards to the 1080 method,
Yep.
are those dead rabbits toxic to dogs?
They absolutely can be, yes. So you do need to manage your dogs while you are doing a baiting program. And basically what happens is, one of the reasons why we use 1080 is it does break down very rapidly in the environment, particularly in moist environment. But saying that, while the carcasses are breaking down, there's no way of knowing how hot they are or how toxic they are for what period of time, because you don't actually really know how much bait that rabbit has consumed and how long it's been in that decomposing process. So you certainly do have to manage your dogs. If you've done a program, do chain your dogs up, and that is the other reason why you've got to do your neighbour notification. So yeah, there is a risk of secondary poisoning. So if your dogs are an issue, that is one of the reasons why you might look at going down the Pindone path to take away some of that pressure. So moving into our other form of chemical control is Pindone Oat Bait. Pindone can be done on carrots as well, and typically Pindone carrots are used in areas where you've got high green feed, so you've got rabbits coming in affecting lawns and so on, where oats aren't quite as attractive in that circumstance. The carrots are a bit sweeter. So Pindone is suitable for all small blocks, hobby farms, urban areas. Anything over 1,000 square metres is the minimum size for Pindone Oat Bait. Pindone Oat Bait can be bought off the shelf at stock and station agents. You don't need any particular certification to get hold of it. Little difference with the Pindone is it requires 3 poison feeds 3 to 5 days apart. So whereas before we were doing 3 free feeds and then 1 poison feed for the 1080, Pindone's a different chemical. It operates a little bit differently. It takes the 3 feeds to build up in the rabbit system to be effective, and typically people get that wrong, and they lay 1 poison feed and they don't get the results they need. So typically work on 3 poison feeds 3 days apart, and you'll have much greater success. There is a lower risk to dogs. 1080 is used in fox bait, so canids are susceptible to it. Pindone, there is a much lower risk. So, your Kelpie collie sized dog, your working dog size, at 15 to 20 kilo mark, it's got to find and eat about 10 fresh dead rabbits and consume those in one sitting. So highly unlikely a dog's going to eat over half its body weight in rabbits in one sitting to suffer from it. And if it does, take to the vet. There is an antidote. He gets a vitamin K shot, and it's back on deck. Again, summer, autumn are the best time to bait. Again, working with that low feed availability. You can see the image on the right with smaller properties. You can do it by hand. You don't need to use the bait layer in all circumstances. It can be done quite successfully by doing it manually. So that's touching on our baiting programs. The next step in successful control is doing warren destruction. Warren destruction is basically the best form of long-term control if you did nothing else. It's always best to do it in conjunction with other tools, but bearing in mind that if you did nothing else, this is going to give you the longest form of control if it's done properly. The critical things that you do have to think about here are you can't miss any warrens. Rabbits readily invade any other holes that have been missed, and you have to rip wide and you have to rip deep. So you're looking at going 3 to 4 meters past the widest known hole, and you're aiming for a 900 mils depth. Rabbits would readily dig, particularly in sandy soils, they'll dig quite deep, and by going at least that 900, you're giving it the best ability to destroy anything down below. A lot of people do get concerned about damage to other other plants and other things in there. They don't really have a chance if you leave the rabbits where they are. So having experience of doing this, we used to do 80 to 90 kilometres of roadside every year when I was working in the southeast, and the regeneration that came back after working through with these ripping programs was absolutely amazing. The rabbits were really pushing the reeve edge hard, and once they were removed with baiting and ripping, it was absolutely amazing what came back. So like I said, rabbits rely heavily on their warren for survival. It exposes them to predation and heat. So if you do want to do your warren destruction, really do it properly. Make sure you put the land back to how it was. This image here was one of the machines that we used to use once we'd done the warren destruction with a modified bulldozer tine. We were able to smooth the land over and let everything come back. So once you've done your warren destruction, a little bit of follow up with fumigation. We use aluminium phosphide tablets, or commonly called FOS toxin. Fumigation basically exposes all the rabbits to a toxic gas down the warren. It's used as a follow-up, like I said, after ripping. It can be used where other controls aren't appropriate. Each hole needs to be treated and sealed. So basically, by doing that, the only option to do it successfully is to use a smoking machine. Use a little smoke machine. Pumps baby oil dripping down onto the exhaust pipe of a modified leaf blower. Lets you locate all the entrances, seal those up. That way you get a good gas concentration underground. And it will only destroy rabbits in the warren at the time of treatment. So if you do go down that path, you want to make sure that you either run some dogs through the area, kids, motorbikes, flush everything back underground, and destroy what's left in the warren. It's a tool. It's very labour intensive. It's very effective for whatever is down there. Needs to be used properly, and there are some accreditations required to get access to the FOS toxin, but it can be a valuable tool. Shooting alone is not rabbit control. Quite simply, it's the same with foxes. It's offset by its recreational value. You see instant results. It can be useful in removing the last few rabbits after a concerted control program, but it really isn't landscape scale control. It will take out a few, but people miss. The bullets, the noise will scare rabbits away, so you're losing that opportunity to target those others. But still a valuable tool, keep it in your toolkit. And the final part of the program really is to follow up with some trapping if that's available to you. You see the traps on the right hand side. Those small steel jawed traps are prohibited in South Australia. You can't use them. Cage trapping is still legal. And so I use of rubber jawed traps, but trapping is not really effective for large scale control or even maintaining levels of control. It's just for some target animals in difficult spots where the other tools that we have available to us aren't quite working. So the trap's got to be used in accordance with the relevant state and territory legislation. And if you do trap rabbits, obviously in a cage trap, they're going to be trapped live. They must be euthanized as soon as possible after capture. So either shoot them or through cervical dislocation. So that's really the 101 in rabbit control. You've got obviously the biological controls of the first part of the program. They're out there, they're doing their thing naturally. Come the summer months, go with your population reduction as far as baiting goes, whether you use 1080 or whether you use Pindone. They're going to have different requirements in different areas, and some are going to suit 1080, some places will suit Pindone. Follow it up with your warren destruction and your fumigation. Shoot the stray ones that are left, and if need be, follow it up with some trapping. All right, all good. So yeah, so that's a bit of your rabbit control basics.
Well, we've got a couple of questions, Josh.
Yep.
Thinking like first up, we've got one that's in regards to, say, the bushfires and the drought situation.
Sure. Look, they're going to be under a lot of pressure. The ones that have survived the bushfires, particularly in heavily burnt areas, they're going to be really struggling for feed availability. It is actually now a golden opportunity, as much as there's going to be, a lot of other things going on in those burnt areas for property management side of things. but it does present a really good opportunity if you do have the time and availability. Get into some rabbit control, because they're going to go into bait very, very easily, because there's not a lot else available for them. And you're also going to have access to a lot of warrens that you may or may not have had access to before for machinery. So it does provide a bit of a unique opportunity to get on top of some rabbits in an unfortunate circumstance otherwise.
In regards to, I suppose it probably almost leads on from that,
Yeah.
is with feedlots, would you bait outside those feedlots, or what would you recommend?
Yeah, certainly. Look, you don't want your stock getting access to the bait. For the amount that's on the ground, it's going to be difficult for them to ingest a toxic dose, but it's not impossible. But really, in a feedlot area, you've got a high concentration of stock, and they're just going to destroy any bait trails that you put down. So they're going to trample through it if they can't eat it. So you're going to lose that disturbed soil that you have as an attractant. And also that you're going to trample the bait into the ground, so then the rabbits aren't going to get as easy access to it. So really, if you do have a feedlot, run a ring around the outside, 2 rings around the outside where possible, and stop those rabbits coming in, and that's going to be your best result. You really, in any situation where you're going to do a baiting program, be it in a paddock or whatever, you really want to minimise stock disturbance, more so from the fact that you want it available to the rabbits. You don't want to
Yeah,
stock to
absolutely.
destroy.
I think the question was more about perhaps how to control that outside that whole feedlot area, so you don't get them coming in,
Yeah.
as to whether they should be like an immediate buffer area, or how far out you should have it, or what you would recommend.
Yeah. So really, it's going to depend on where the rabbits are. Typically, rabbits will only travel a couple of 100 meters from their warren structure or their home. So if you've got warrens there, that's where you're going to have to do some measuring and juggling. If they're coming into the feedlot from a warren that's within that 200 meters, it's quite comfortable to run your bait trail in between the two and interrupt that movement coming in towards the feedlot. But yeah, if they're in the feedlot, you're going to have to destroy them in other methods potentially, to stop them coming in. But yeah, by running a buffer zone or a barrier externally to the feedlot, that's going to give you your best results.
Fantastic, thanks, Josh. And there's another couple coming in.
Yep.
How long are the viruses active in deceased rabbits? As in, can I transfer dead ones I find to another area?
Yes, you can. It's been known in a research situation to survive on an outside host. It was actually on a piece of rag, I believe, for about 105 days. So you certainly can transfer a carcass to a different area of your property, allow it to get fly blown, and the flies can start to spread it further for you. You can even just, if you needed to, that it will survive freezing. So you can freeze it, hang on to it for a while, wait till that ideal opportunity comes again, maybe the next springtime or something, and you can fire it up again by taking the carcass out, hanging it up away from scavengers. So put it in a cage trap or something like that, and it can be spread that way. Again, getting the flies stuck into it.
Super, thanks, Josh. And can you bait with Pindone for the 3 times per week, as
Yes.
in 5 days, and then use 1080?
Look, you could. There's no reason why you can't. If you've done a successful Pindone program, you shouldn't need to follow it up with any 1080. I don't see the benefit of jumping or using the two. It becomes more expensive. Pindone is more expensive to purchase initially. So if you're going to use 1080 as a follow-up, I would just go with the 1080 program. And if you've still got, do your free feeding, and then do your 1080 bait trail. If you've still got a bit of activity after the 1080 bait trail, you may have just some animals that are a bit slower in taking the bait and getting up to speed with it. I'd just lay another 1080 trail. By doing a Pindone trail, you or 3 Pindone trails and then a 1080 trail, I think you're overcomplicating things.
I don't think there's any further questions at this stage, so I would like to thank everybody who joined the webinar today. I'd like to thank Josh for sharing his insights and expertise. If you have any additional questions, feel free to contact us via the Sheep Connect SA website, follow up any further queries. So just like to thank AWI and Sheep Industry Fund again for the support of Sheep Connect, and thank you for your time and have a wonderful evening.